Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to talk about mitosis and meiosis. Mitosis and meiosis are two types of cell divisions. And what do we mean by a cell division? Well, basically the cells in our body will at some point need to, when we grow and things like that, they'll need to get larger, but at some point they also need to divide to produce more cells. And we know this must be true because at some point during your development you were just a single cell. And you've obviously, that cell has grown and divided thousands and thousands of times to make the approximately trillion cells that are basically all interacting to make you who you are. So cell division is really just cells grow and at some point they will divide. Now there are actually two types of cell division, and the two types of cell division are called mitosis and meiosis. One of them is there to basically make just more regular body cells, and one of them makes what we call sex cells, and that's a little bit different, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. So the first thing we're going to look at is mitosis, the type of cell division that just makes more regular body cells. So mitosis, we've got a cell here in this example that has 4 chromosomes. Now in a normal human cell you would have 46 chromosomes. Now when we say there's 46 chromosomes, there's another way we can express it. We can say there are 23 pairs. And you can see even in this one with the 4, we've got 4 chromosomes, or 2 pairs. We've got 2 large chromosomes and 2 slightly shorter chromosomes. And they've been colored red and blue, which is a little bit convenient, because each member of those pairs, so this pair, we call these homologous pairs. The 2 large ones are one homologous pair, and the 2 small ones are a homologous pair. And these chromosomes are very similar. Now remember, a chromosome is basically a DNA sausage. It's a long length of DNA coiled up into a sausage. And homologous essentially means similar. So these 2 sausages here are similar. What makes them similar? Well, they're similar in size. They also have the same genes on them, or genes for the same thing. So this one will have genes, maybe have a gene for hair color and eye color, and on the other one in the same position we'll find a gene for hair color and eye color. But we might find slightly different versions of those genes. So slightly different versions of a gene, we call those alleles. So homologous chromosomes, or the homologous pairs, carry the different alleles, the different versions of a gene. So when we start, so this cell has 4 chromosomes, or 2 pairs. A real human cell would have 46 or 23 pairs, but that gets a little bit messy to kind of look at as a diagram. So maybe this is a fruit fly or some other organism that has not quite so many chromosomes. So this cell is what we call diploid. Now di at the front means 2. It means it's got 2 of every chromosome. It's got the full number. So a diploid cell here, it's got 2 of each chromosome. It's got those homologous pairs. So that just means it's got the full number. Another way of writing that is saying 2n. 2 of each chromosome. And in this case, 2 of each means we've got 4 chromosomes. So this is what we're starting with in this type of cell. Now mitosis is all about making more body cells that are essentially genetically identical. So they all need a copy of the DNA of those recipes inside there. So the first step for any kind of cell division is actually to copy the DNA, is what we call DNA replication. So when the DNA is copied, these single sausages sort of uncoil, and the strands split and nucleotides are matched with the ones on each side to make 2 strands. And so what we end up with is, instead of a single sausage, when we replicate them, we end up here with double sausages. So we've still got 4 chromosomes, but they're now made out of 2 copies that are attached together. And we call each copy here, each half now, sometimes called a chromatid. So each chromosome here is made out of 2 copies. It's a double sausage of DNA stuck together. So mitosis, or any kind of cell division, the first step is DNA replication. Now the next step, this is where you've got to remember the difference between the 2 types of cell division. And the next one here, in mitosis, the chromosomes pair up end to end. So in single file. Chromosomes pair up end to end or in single file. Then spindle fibers will form. Spindle fibers are these little lines here, and they attach onto the chromosomes and will pull them to either end of the cell. So they'll pull one copy to either end of the cell. So once we get the chromosomes being pulled apart, the cell actually divides, and you can see we end up with here, how many chromosomes have we got? 4. We've got two big ones and 2 small ones again. It's identical to what we started with. So by pulling those copies apart, we basically end up with 2 exact copies of what we started with. So these cells are identical not only to each other, but to the original, what we call the parental cell. And these cells, because the original one's called the parental cell, these ones are called the daughter cells. Now it's got nothing to do with daughters, or it's just saying these are the ones we end up with. So the daughter cells, the ones we end up with, are the same, they're genetically identical to the one we started with. And if you go back in the video, you'll see you can count the exact same chromosomes as what we started with. So these again are still diploid. We've got 2 of each. We've got 2 of the biggest ones and 2 of the slightly smaller ones. So these are diploid 2n, and in this case that means 4 chromosomes. So in a human, 2n is 46. When our cells have got 2 of each, we've got 46 chromosomes. Alright, you'll notice these labels along the way. These steps have sort of names. You don't need to worry about those. That's sort of more senior stuff, so just ignore that for now. So mitosis, important points is here. It occurs in our body cells, which are sometimes they have a special name called somatic cells. So any of the body cells in your leg, your arm, in your skin, your muscle, they're all called somatic cells. And it produces cells that are genetically identical with the same number of chromosomes. Meiosis. So why do we have another type of cell division? Well, meiosis produces sex cells. So that's things like sperm and egg cells. And sperm and egg cells don't have the full number of chromosomes. And that makes sense, because when the sperm and the egg come together, if they both had a full number, then the kid would would suddenly have double. So the sperm and the egg only carry 1 of each chromosome, so that when they fuse, both contribute half the number of chromosomes, and then you get the full set in the resulting offspring. So meiosis is the type of cell division that produces sex cells. So we start again with a regular cell, and again you can see this one here. We've got 4 chromosomes, so it's diploid, 2 of each. And just like before, the first step is DNA replication. So our single sausage chromosomes, DNA is replicated, we end up with our double sausage chromosomes. But what's different, and this is the key thing to remember here, is that this time the chromosomes line up in pairs. So this time we get essentially, it's not single file, we get them lining up in pairs. So here they are lining up in pairs. And it's always the homologous pairs that will pair up together. So the chromosomes of the same size. And the chromosomes where this one originally came from dad and this one originally we got from mum. And the chromosomes where on this one we might have a version of a gene, an allele for brown hair, and on this one we might have an allele for blonde hair. So we've got different versions of the same genes on those homologous pairs. So the homologous pairs are the ones that pair up during meiosis. So now the pairs are pulled apart. So the pairs that are separated, and we get a first division. And here you can see the chromosomes are still in their double sausage form. So the cells are actually going to divide again. So this time they line up. From here, they'll line up end to end, and essentially just these 2 copies are pulled apart. So that's more like in mitosis. So they just line up end to end, and the 2 copies are pulled apart, and that gives us essentially these 4 daughter cells. And there's a couple of things that you'll notice here, is that the 4 daughter cells, firstly, they're different. Here we've got the 2 red ones, and here the 2 blue ones. Now they could have paired up differently. If I go back a couple of steps, here, if they'd paired up, so that's because we ended up with the 2 blue ones on this side and the 2 red ones on this side. These pairs could pair up the other way around. We could have had the blue on this side and the red on this side. But because we had both blue on one side, down at the very end, we end up with a couple that are blue here and a couple that are red here. So they're genetically different. Not only that, they're different from the parent. How are they different? Well, in the original cell, in the parental cell, we started with 4 chromosomes, and here we've only got 2. So we've got half the number of chromosomes. So half the number of chromosomes, we say that is N. We've only got 1 of each. N being, so you can think of that as 1N. In maths, you wouldn't show the 1. So N just means 1 of each chromosome. And in this case, that means there's 2. So another term for having 2 of each chromosome is being diploid. Di meaning 2, diploid. And if you've only got 1 of each chromosome, is haploid. So these cells are haploid. And these cells will either, depending on whether this was a male or a female, will either be sperm or egg cells. Now you'll also notice that some of these chromosomes are not entirely blue or red. And if we go back here, when they cross over, there can actually be a little bit of exchange between the tips when they're paired up in their pairs, kind of side by side. The chromosomes can sometimes exchange small segments. And that just gives you a different combination of alleles in these chromosomes. Now that doesn't happen during mitosis. Mitosis gives you exactly identical cells because the chromosomes don't pair up. They can't actually cross over. There can't be any crossing over because they're all just end to end. So in this case, the chromosomes pair up side by side in pairs. They divide again, and we get, after the second division, we get cells that have half the number of chromosomes that are egg or sperm cells. And it's really important that an egg and a sperm have half the number of chromosomes, because when an egg and a sperm come together, when they fuse, they will then have the full number, and that can develop into a person. If the egg and the sperm had a full number of chromosomes, then the kid would inherit a double set, and then their kids would get twice as much again. It would double every generation, and it just wouldn't work. So, key things here, these cells are genetically different. They have half the number of chromosomes, or they're haploid. And this occurs in a special, meiosis occurs in a special group of cells called our germ cells. And depending on whether you're male or female, they're either found in your testes, your testicles, or in the ovaries. So those are the 2 types of divisions, mitosis and meiosis. Mitosis, remember, key thing in both of them, the first step is always replication. These single sausages, DNA sausages or chromosomes, are turned into their double sausage form, the double sausage chromosomes here. In mitosis, they line up end to end. In meiosis, they line up firstly in pairs. So single file, and here lining up in pairs. In mitosis, they just divide once and give us identical daughter cells as what we started with. In meiosis, they divide, the pairs are separated, and then they line up end to end like in mitosis, and the 2 copies are pulled apart. But that ultimately means we would get 2 divisions, so we end up with 4 cells, but they have half the number of chromosomes. So the key points here to remember, mitosis and meiosis. While mitosis, the purpose is to make body cells or somatic cells. The location, it occurs in our body or somatic cells. They divide to make more body cells. Our daughter cells, the daughter cells produced from mitosis, have the same number of chromosomes, so they're diploid. They still have 2 of each. The daughter cells that are produced are genetically identical. So those are the 4 key points. Now you need to know the steps in mitosis. You don't need to know the names of each phase, but you need to know the steps in terms of what happens to the chromosomes. But these are the 4 kind of key take-home points. The purpose is to make more body cells. It occurs in our somatic or body cells. We have daughter cells with the same number of chromosomes. They're diploid. They've got 2 of each. And the daughter cells are genetically identical. Meiosis. So the purpose of meiosis is to make sex cells, to make gametes. So gametes is another term for sex cells. Things like egg and sperm cells, or if you're looking at a plant, you've got things like pollen and the ovules, again the little egg cells inside the flower. So these occur in our germ cells. Now that's one thing that is students often get wrong. Students often say meiosis occurs in sex cells. Well, no, sex cells are what are produced at the end. So if a sex cell underwent meiosis, well then they'd get half the number again. So that wouldn't work. So meiosis occurs in germ cells, are special cells found in our ovaries or testes, depending on whether you're male or female, and they produce sex cells. So meiosis occurs in our germ cells, in our ovaries and testes. The daughter cells have half the number of chromosomes. They're haploid. So the daughter cells have half the number of chromosomes. They're haploid, or N. The daughter cells are also genetically different. So they can get different members of each homologous pair, and they're going to be genetically different in terms of the fact that they have half the number of chromosomes. So there's no way they can be the exact same as the original parent. So meiosis produces 4 daughter cells that are genetically different. So cool. Those, I think, are the key take-home messages for the differences between mitosis and meiosis. So I put up another couple of videos in this playlist that show you maybe sort of more animated step-by-step view of what's happening during mitosis and meiosis. So have a look at those. You don't need to know the names of the phases. You just need to know the basic steps of what happens to the chromosomes and those key points I went over at the end there. Cool, I hope you found that helpful, and we'll get on to the next one.